They say cruelty often wears a mask of ceremony. It happened in the heart of a palace lost to time, somewhere beyond the misted mountains of ancient China. You are there. You hear the metallic scrape of armor against stone, the faint hiss of torches flickering along the walls. You expect the hush of an orderly court, the disciplined murmur of officials. Then you see them, the princesses. Young, delicate, and terrified, their silk robes stained with soil and sweat, herded like lambs into a courtyard glazed with frost and shadow. Their eyes search desperately for salvation, for a whisper of compassion, for something familiar, and find only the cold, calculating gaze of a warlord who has reduced their world to a chessboard. The air is thick with smoke and fear, and the faint metallic tang of blood lingers like a promise. A drum beats in the distance, a pulse that echoes the pounding of your own heart. Torches flare, revealing rows of soldiers with spears angled like jagged teeth. The princesses tremble, some whispering prayers in voices barely audible over the cadence of boots. And then you notice it. Chains, not ordinary chains, but gilded, adorned with symbols of conquest, meant to humiliate as much as restrain. The youngest cries, her voice piercing, and it is swallowed by a silence that feels unnatural, deliberate. The warlord steps forward. You see the glint of his armor, the subtle curve of his blade, but more than that, you feel his presence, as if the shadows themselves bend to him. He does not speak. He does not need to. The princesses understand before you do. There is a ritual about to unfold, one that turns fear into spectacle. A servant appears, holding a scroll. The words are indecipherable to you, yet the intent is unmistakable. One by one, the princesses are examined, as if their value could be measured like grain, like coins, like trophies. The warlord circles them, his eyes not stopping at beauty or youth, but hunger and something colder, ownership. There is a silence, then a sound so subtle yet so chilling, a soft gasp, a shiver running through the air like electricity. And suddenly, you realize you were not expecting this. You thought you understood power. You thought you could anticipate cruelty. But nothing prepares you for the deliberate, intimate horror of seeing innocence measured, claimed, and bent to the will of a man whose imagination for dominance knows no limits. The first command is whispered. It slices through the courtyard, sharper than any sword. You watch, frozen, as hope fractures in real time, as the rules of humanity bend into something unrecognizable, and everything changes. In that moment, you understand the truth. What follows is not madness. It is strategy, and history will record the triumphs of empires, but not the quiet, lingering screams of the women whose lives were stolen to build them. You thought what you saw was the worst of it. You thought the fear in the courtyard, the chains, the whispered commands, was the edge of cruelty. You are wrong. This story is not about a moment. It is about a system. A meticulously crafted method of domination, of conquest, of stripping people of their dignity so that power could be absolute. It wasn't madness that orchestrated these scenes. It wasn't a fleeting act of cruelty. It was strategy. Every fear-inducing gesture, every ritualized humiliation, every calculated glance had a purpose beyond what any ordinary human could comprehend. The princesses weren't just prisoners. They were instruments, tokens in a larger game that decided the rise and fall of kingdoms. Their suffering was not incidental. It was a tool. You will see how ambition can twist into obsession, how innocence can be weaponized, and how a warlord could bend the moral compass of an entire empire with nothing more than a smile, a glare, or a whisper. And as you follow the story, understand this: what you're about to witness challenges everything you know about power. It strips away the romanticized tales of conquest and reveals the intimate horror that lies beneath every throne. This story will take you from the silent corridors of palaces, where every shadow hides a threat, to the brutal battlefields that decided the fate of empires. You will follow a figure whose rise was as calculated as it was relentless, whose cruelty was not random, but a signature. One so refined that it left entire cities trembling and countless lives broken. You will witness the evolution of terror, from whispers in a darkened hall to commands shouted over the clash of steel. But there is more than fear here. There is cunning. There is strategy. There is the horrifying clarity of someone who understands the human psyche so intimately that they can bend hope, dignity, and love to their will. And there is the truth that will unsettle you. History does not remember the victims as it should. It celebrates victories, crowns triumphs, and erases the intimate suffering that made those victories possible. By the end of this story, you will understand a chilling fact. The terror inflicted upon these princesses was not the aberration of a monster. It was the engine of empire. It was a deliberate, methodical, horrifyingly effective strategy. You will see that behind every conquest, behind every celebrated battle, behind every empire etched into history, there was a cost far greater than most ever dare to imagine. And when you witness the depths of what was done, how strategy became spectacle, how cruelty became currency, you will never see power the same way again. The question you must ask yourself, as you journey into this shadowed past, is this: how far can a human mind go when it decides that domination is not enough unless it is absolute? This is the story of that mind. This is the story of the warlord. And this is the story of the princesses who became unwilling witnesses to history's darkest calculations. You are no longer in the courtyard. You are somewhere quieter now, but no less foreboding. A child's chamber, dimly lit by flickering lanterns, where the scent of incense mingles with the sharp tang of fear. You see him, not yet a warlord, not yet a tyrant, but a boy. His eyes are wide, alert, absorbing everything, memorizing every slight, every injustice, every whispered insult that drifts through the halls. Even now, you can feel the weight pressing down on him, the suffocating rules of a court where a single misstep could cost a life. It begins here. In the cradle of privilege, he learns that power is fragile, that trust is scarce, and that betrayal can arrive in the gentlest of smiles. You notice the servants flinch when he cries, the tutors tense when he frowns, the guards bowing with a precision that speaks of fear rather than respect. Even as a child, he senses it. Weakness invites destruction, sentiment is a liability, and cruelty, when wielded deliberately, is a weapon more reliable than loyalty. You hear a commotion beyond the paper doors. A relative accused of a minor offense, dragged from the room, humiliated, punished before the eyes of the boy. You watch as his small fingers clutch the edge of the low table, nails digging into wood, and something hardens inside him. It is not sympathy. It is understanding. It is calculation. He realizes the world will not protect him, will not forgive mistakes, and that mercy is a currency far too costly to rely upon. First betrayals leave scars. First injustices leave maps of the psyche that guide every choice. You feel it too. The cold, prickling awareness that shapes him, that teaches him to observe, to predict, to manipulate. Every whispered insult, every subtle slight from a sibling, every nod of approval from a teacher becomes a lesson in control. By the time he is old enough to grasp a sword, he already knows that fear is sharper than steel and obedience more pliable than silk. You notice the subtle shifts, the first glimmer of obsession in his eyes, a fascination not with play or friendship, but with dominance. He watches animals fight in the courtyard, intrigued not by their survival, but by the precise moment one submits to the other. He experiments quietly, nudging, prodding, testing limits. He learns quickly. Pain is predictable and despair is instructive. And yet, it is not all darkness. There is brilliance here, a mind assembling itself like a fine instrument, attuned to rhythm, balance, and leverage. Every slight is noted, every opportunity cataloged. You realize that what terrifies is not the boy himself, but the inevitability of his future. A human mind forged in observation, hardened by betrayal, tempered by necessity. A mind that will later see princesses not as people, but as pawns, as instruments, as proof of his control. In this quiet chamber, you feel the first tremors of the storm to come. And you understand, to witness him now is to see the origin of something terrible, deliberate, and unyielding. The warlord was not born in battlefields. He was born in the shadows of fear, raised by betrayal, and baptized in the silent lessons of cruelty. You are back in the corridors of power, but now the boy has grown into a young man. The palace, once a sanctuary of walls and lanterns, now feels like a cage of whispers, betrayals, and unspoken threats. You sense it. The air is taut with tension, every step echoing in the stone halls like a countdown. The warlord is on the edge of a precipice, and history is about to push him over. It begins with betrayal. You see it unfold before your eyes. Allies he trusted, men whose loyalty had been purchased with coins, favors, and whispered promises, turning against him in a single orchestrated moment. The council convenes in secret chambers. Whispers slip through cracks in the walls. Accusations fly like arrows in the dim torchlight. You hear the shock in the voices of those who had been his friends. His supporters, voices that once spoke with reverence now drip with venom. And then the punishment. The boy, no, the man, watches helplessly as one of his closest confidants is dragged into the courtyard. You feel the chill in the air, the way the torches flicker against the frost, how the stones beneath the soldiers' boots seem to hum with impending doom. A single command is issued, and you hear it before you feel it. The sharp crack of leather against flesh, the low moan that rises and then shatters. The message is clear. Trust is fragile, and betrayal has consequences. You see the shift in his eyes. Something fractures. Anger, yes, but beneath it, something colder, more calculating, more absolute. The man realizes that mercy is a weakness he can no longer afford. The subtle human empathy that lingered from his youth splinters under the weight of fear, betrayal, and necessity. The moment is almost cinematic in its brutality. He is surrounded by the consequences of human frailty, and he knows that to survive, he must become something else entirely. He tests it first quietly. A servant disobeys a minor order, and the young man's response is swift, precise, and terrifying in its clarity. Not rage, not chaos, but a lesson delivered with exacting cruelty, calculated to leave a mark, not just on the body, but on the mind. You feel the tension radiate, the moment when humanity fractures into strategy and obsession. By nightfall, the breaking point is complete. You watch him alone in the shadowed hallways, the flickering lanterns casting long, spindly shadows that merge with his own. He touches the walls as if feeling for weakness, imagining the empire he will someday command, understanding that fear will be the currency of his reign, and power the only language that will be understood. This is the transformation you were waiting for. The boy shaped by betrayal and observation has become the man who will orchestrate terror with precision. The warlord is no longer capable of mercy, not because he has lost all humanity, but because he has seen clearly what humanity can cost him. And in this moment you realize, everything that follows, the princesses, the chains, the calculated cruelty, has its roots in this breaking point. The man you witness now is fully awake to his own capacity for domination. The seeds planted in childhood, watered by fear and betrayal, have grown into something terrifyingly deliberate. You are witnessing the birth of a monster, and the clock of history has just begun to tick in his favor. You are standing on the edge of a battlefield, though the fighting has not yet begun. The air is thick with dust, the metallic tang of anticipation, and the quiet murmurs of soldiers who sense something in their commander they cannot name, but that chills them all the same. You watch as the warlord, now fully formed, moves among them, a shadow within the ranks, calculating every gesture, every breath, every tremor of fear. This is where power begins, not with armies, not with titles, but with the first deliberate acts of cruelty. He tests his subordinates, watching for weakness, rewarding obedience with a glance, punishing defiance with precision. A soldier falters, and the lesson is swift and symbolic. A blade against the ground, a belt across the back, a reminder that submission is survival. You feel the tension coil in the air. Each man knows the cost of failure. Each woman knows the weight of his gaze. You see his first calculated victories, and they are as subtle as they are brutal. A rival noble underestimates him and is humiliated publicly, not killed. Yet, the crowd watches, laughter and horror mingling in equal measure, as the warlord demonstrates that power is not only physical, but psychological. Every word he speaks, every gesture he makes, becomes a lesson. He is to be feared, respected, and obeyed. You follow him into his first conquest, a fortified city that believes itself untouchable. And yet, his strategy is flawless. He does not simply charge. He maneuvers, manipulates, and coerces. Siege engines rumble, archers line the walls, but it is the subtle terror he orchestrates that shatters the city first. The leaders are paraded, their pride stripped. Supplies are cut. Rumors of his ruthlessness reach the streets before his army even enters. By the time the gates fall, resistance is almost ceremonial. You feel the inevitability in the air. Resistance is meaningless against someone who understands fear as a weapon. Every victory cements his reputation. Nobles who once dismissed him as young and untested now bow, not out of loyalty, but out of survival instinct. You watch as alliances shift like quicksilver. Old rivalries crumble, replaced by a reluctant recognition of his intellect and ruthlessness. Even those who hate him cannot deny the brilliance of his strategy. And then the first public message, a proclamation, a subtle display of dominance, a demonstration that power can be communicated without a sword leaving its scabbard. The people listen, trembling not because they understand his strategy, but because they feel it. His reach extends beyond armies into minds, into hearts, into the delicate fabric of society itself. You notice the first rival eliminated, not with spectacle, but with cunning. The threat is removed surgically, the lesson clear. None can oppose him without consequence. You feel it yourself, the creeping awe, the recognition of something unstoppable. By the end of this chapter of his life, you realize that the warlord's ascent is not random. It is deliberate. Each cruelty, each victory, each psychological maneuver is a building block, laying the foundation for the empire he will dominate. And beneath the spectacle, beneath the banners and the steel, there is a deeper, darker current, one that will define his legacy and mark the world forever. This is not simply a story of battles won. This is the story of the calculated rise of a mind that understands terror as art and domination as inevitability. And you are standing silently on the threshold of his signature methods, the instruments of horror that will immortalize him. You are in the shadowed halls of the palace once more, but now the warlord's presence saturates the air. You feel it before you see it. A tension so thick it presses against your chest, a knowledge that every corner, every corridor, every glance could be a trap. You realize this is his signature, the weapon of his mind, honed as carefully as any sword, sharper than any blade, and far more terrifying. It is not enough to defeat his enemies on the battlefield. Victory is incomplete unless it is total mind, body, and soul alike. You watch as captured princesses are brought before him, not as prisoners, but as instruments of a strategy designed to instill fear, obedience, and submission. The method is layered, insidious, and precise. You feel it like a current running under the skin, a combination of spectacle and subtlety, of ritual and improvisation. The first step is symbolic. The chains are not merely restraints, they are statements. Gilded and adorned, they mock the wearer's status, proclaiming publicly that no rank, no title, no birthright protects against his will. You hear the whispers ripple through the court, the suppressed gasps and stifled cries. The message is unmistakable. He owns not just the land, but the people, their bodies, their dignity. Next comes psychological manipulation. He studies his captives with an almost clinical obsession. Every glance, every whisper, every tremor cataloged. You feel the weight of it on yourself, as if the warlord's gaze can strip layers of thought and emotion in a single moment. He alternates cruelty with false leniency, pleasure with terror, leaving his victims in a state of constant uncertainty. Fear becomes a language, one that every mind understands instinctively. And then the spectacle, public humiliation, carefully orchestrated, designed to imprint a permanent memory of power and dominance. You watch as a princess is paraded through a courtyard, her dignity stripped piece by piece, not by brute force alone, but by ritualized acts of symbolic degradation. You sense the collective terror of the audience, the subtle ripple of comprehension. None are safe, none are immune. But it is not only the captives who are ensnared. You see it in the soldiers, the nobles, the ministers. His method extends into the very structure of society, binding loyalty with fear, obedience with terror. Every act, every command, every punishment is part of a system, psychological warfare made flesh. And you realize, as you stand frozen in the courtyard, that the warlord's genius lies in this terrifying synthesis. Cruelty as instrument, fear as strategy, and domination as art. The method is brutally effective. Cities surrender without a fight when rumors of his practices reach them. Rivals hesitate, calculating whether confrontation is worth the cost. Alliances form and fracture based on the perception of his omnipotence. And all the while, the princesses remain the ultimate testament to his power, the living symbols of his ability to bend life itself to his will. You feel the lingering horror. The warlord's signature is not just in blood or conquest. It is in the minds he breaks, the pride he shatters, the very essence of control made visible. And when you leave this moment, you cannot shake it. The true terror is not the chains, the humiliation, or the spectacle. It is the precision, the calculation, the intelligence behind it, the cold, deliberate artistry of fear. You stand at the edge of the empire now, the wind carrying the distant clang of armor, the faint cries of those caught in its widening grasp. You feel it before you see it. The tremor of an approaching storm, the inexorable pressure of forces bigger than a single man's ambition. The warlord is no longer alone in his designs. Rivals, kingdoms, and factions sense his rise. They prepare, as all who face a predator must, though many underestimate the depth of his cunning. You see the first challengers emerge, neighboring generals with armies, advisors plotting from hidden chambers, rebellious princes seeking to reclaim authority. Their banners ripple in the wind, each one a promise of confrontation, a test of strategy and will. You hear the murmurs of spies and informants, the quiet rustle of secret alliances forming in the shadows. The air is taut with expectation. Any misstep, any hesitation, could unravel everything the warlord has meticulously built. Yet he moves with the calm precision of a mind that has been trained in fear, manipulation, and observation. You watch as he surveys the encroaching threats, not with panic, but with an almost clinical detachment. He identifies weaknesses, calculates odds, and sets traps. Even now, before swords clash, before cities burn, you sense the inevitability of his response. A tide of strategy so meticulously orchestrated it bends reality itself. You notice the subtle psychological warfare he unleashes. Messages of terror are sent to rival courts. Rumors spread like wildfire, and propaganda infiltrates every corner of the lands around him. You feel it, communities whispering in fear, allies shifting allegiances out of survival, enemies second-guessing their every move. The Empire's structure bends, fractures, and reforms in response to his omnipresent mind, long before any armies meet in open battle. And yet, the stakes are monumental. The warlord is outnumbered, out-resourced, and surrounded by threats that would crush any ordinary man. You can almost hear the heartbeat of history accelerating, each pulse a reminder that empires rise and fall, that victory is never certain, and that even the most terrifying genius can be undone by chance, error, or betrayal. You see him alone in the strategy tent, maps spread before him, hands tracing lines of attack and counterattack, eyes gleaming with both anticipation and an unspoken understanding of the risk. The conflict is not merely physical, it is psychological, political, and deeply personal. You feel the tension radiating outward. Families torn apart, cities trembling, and the innocent caught in the crossfire of ambition. The princesses, still bound in chains of fear and submission, serve as constant reminders of the stakes. They are trophies, symbols, and tools, woven into the very fabric of the warlord's strategy. And in this charged, precarious moment, you sense the inevitability of the climax. The confrontation that history will remember, the battlefield where his methods will collide with the forces that seek to challenge him. You understand now that what follows will not be simple war. It will be a spectacle of fear, strategy, and brutality, a crescendo that will echo across generations. You feel it in your chest, in your pulse, in the tension that hangs in the air. The rising conflict is unstoppable, and the warlord, calculated, remorseless, and terrifyingly clever, is poised to meet it head-on. The storm is gathering, and you are standing at the edge of it. You are back in the courtyard, the scene from the opening now unfolding fully in all its horrifying clarity. The frost glints on the stone tiles, and the torches cast long, trembling shadows. You hear the drumbeat of soldiers, steady and unrelenting, echoing against the walls. You feel the weight of anticipation in the air, thick and suffocating, and the metallic tang of fear on your tongue. The princesses stand in a line, their silk gowns muddied, their eyes wide with terror. You can see the chains glinting cruelly in the firelight, the delicate symbols of status turned instruments of submission. And now you understand, this is no random act. It is the culmination of strategy, of methodical cruelty honed over years, a spectacle designed to imprint fear upon everyone who witnesses it. The warlord steps forward, his armor reflecting the torchlight like the surface of a dark, merciless sea. You feel the authority radiate from him. It is palpable, a force that bends the will of those who watch. You notice how he surveys the princesses, not with anger, but with calculated intent. Each movement, each gesture, is a demonstration of control, a lesson in the currency of terror. The first command is given, a whisper sharp as steel. You see it ripple through the courtyard. The captives flinch, the soldiers tense, the air vibrates with expectation. One of the princesses is selected. You watch helplessly as she is paraded before the assembly, her dignity stripped not with brute force alone, but through ritualized acts meant to break her spirit, to demonstrate the complete dominance of the warlord. You feel it, the collective horror of the audience, the way fear spreads like wildfire, consuming the hearts of even the bravest. And in this moment, you understand the genius and the cruelty of his method. Psychological manipulation intertwined with spectacle, fear weaponized as both shield and sword. Every eye is on him, every mind captive to his will, every soul marked by the lesson he delivers. The courtyard becomes a theater of terror. Whispers of obedience, stifled sobs, the clinking of chains, the precise gestures of soldiers, all orchestrated to reinforce the hierarchy he has constructed through years of cunning, calculation, and cruelty. You watch as the message sinks in. No one is untouchable, no one is safe, and power demands total submission. And then, just as the crescendo reaches its peak, you realize the truth. This is not madness. This is the calculated apex of a lifetime of strategy. The warlord's rise, his signature methods, his manipulation of fear, all converge here. The courtyard, once empty of context, now becomes the perfect symbol of the empire he has shaped. Disciplined, terrifying, and unrelentingly absolute. You step back, breath caught in your chest, as the realization dawns. The spectacle you have witnessed, the horror of what the princesses endure, the precision of the cruelty. It is the moment that defines him. History will remember the empire, the battles, the victories. But this moment, intimate and horrifying, is the true testament to his power. And in the silence that follows, you feel it settle over you. Fear, awe, and an understanding that history's most terrifying figures are not monsters born of impulse, but architects of terror, sculptors of domination, and masters of the human psyche. You can feel it in the air, a subtle shift, almost imperceptible at first. The warlord, once untouchable, begins to notice cracks in the walls of his empire. The courtiers who once trembled before him now exchange secret glances. The generals who once obeyed without question hesitate ever so slightly. You sense the tension, the quiet hum of betrayal lurking beneath the surface. Paranoia sets in. You see him pacing in the shadowed halls, his fingers tracing the edges of maps, his eyes darting to the corners where spies and traitors might be hiding. Every whisper becomes a threat, every silence a conspiracy. The warlord who once weaponized fear now finds it turning inward, infecting his own mind. You feel the chill of inevitability. Even the master of terror cannot control everything. Allies begin to vanish, some through mysterious deaths, others through defection. You see the subtle betrayals, the quiet plotting of those who once bowed to him, and you realize that the chains he used to bind others now stretch invisibly around him. Even the princesses, once symbols of his absolute power, become reminders of his growing vulnerability. Proof that every act of domination carries a price. The public grows uneasy. Rumors of cruelty that once ensured obedience now inspire resentment. You hear the murmurs of citizens who once feared to speak, the subtle plotting of factions who see opportunity in the cracks of his empire. Each act of terror that once solidified his authority now becomes a spark for rebellion. You feel the weight of inevitability pressing down. Power built on fear is a fragile edifice, and even the strongest walls crumble from within. Then comes the overreach. You see it clearly. A decision made in haste, a calculated risk that backfires. A city is punished too harshly, an ally is executed prematurely, a rival underestimated. The dominoes begin to fall. Soldiers hesitate in battle, bureaucrats fail to deliver, and the once unified empire shudders under the weight of miscalculation. You feel the tension like a storm tightening its grip, every heartbeat echoing the cracks in the warlord's armor. Finally, betrayal reaches its apex. Trusted confidants turn, seizing opportunity in the chaos. You witness it. A coup in the making, a carefully orchestrated end to the man who once seemed invincible. The warlord fights, yes, with the skill and cunning that defined his rise, but the momentum of history is against him. His own methods of fear and manipulation, once so effective, now alienate, isolate, and ensnare him. By the end, you see the cost of absolute domination. The warlord, who mastered fear and submission, now confronts his own vulnerability. The empire he built with precision trembles, and the echoes of his cruelty reverberate against empty halls, abandoned courtyards, and broken lives. You feel the finality in the air. Even the most calculated power has its limits, and terror, wielded without restraint, inevitably turns upon its master. And as silence falls, you understand the harsh lesson history offers. Mastery of fear may command obedience, but it cannot shield one from the consequences of hubris, betrayal, and the inexorable tide of time. You stand now at the edge of history, looking down upon the remnants of what once seemed invincible. The warlord is gone, vanquished, betrayed, or consumed by his own ambition, but his shadow lingers. The palaces, the courtyards, the chains, and the echoes of fear still hang in the air, whispering lessons of power and terror that resonate centuries later. History remembers him as a conqueror, a brilliant strategist, a ruler who reshaped the maps of empires. Statues, chronicles, and legends immortalize victories and battles, victories that seem almost mythic in their scale. But the truth, what you have witnessed, paints a different picture. It is intimate, personal, and deeply unsettling. The true horror was not the land he conquered, the cities he razed, or the armies he commanded. It was the lives he broke, the dignity he stole, the minds he bent to his will. You feel it in the stories of the princesses, the quiet, enduring testament to a cruelty that is often erased from history books. They were more than pawns. They were witnesses, living proof of the intimate, deliberate, and merciless strategies that built an empire. Their suffering was the hidden currency of power, a cost seldom acknowledged, yet integral to the rise of a man who could manipulate fear with surgical precision. And yet, there is a paradox. In studying him, you also see the brilliance of human intellect twisted by obsession, the terrifying potential of a mind that understands strategy, psychology, and control better than anyone else. The warlord's genius and his monstrosity are inseparable, two sides of the same coin. You realize that this is what makes him unforgettable, and what makes history both awe-inspiring and horrifying. You walk through the echoes of his empire and notice the lingering lessons. Fear can rule, but it cannot endure without consequence. Absolute domination breeds paranoia, betrayal, and collapse. Every act of cruelty, no matter how calculated, leaves ripples that time will magnify. And perhaps most chillingly, you understand that the capacity for such calculated terror exists in human nature itself, waiting, sometimes, for the right circumstances to awaken. The legacy of this warlord is therefore twofold, one of awe and one of warning. Statues may crumble, battles may fade into obscurity, but the psychological imprint of his methods, the way he turned fear into art, submission into spectacle, resonates still. You feel it as you leave the ruins of his empire, a subtle unease settling in your chest. History does not simply remember, it interprets. And in that interpretation, much of the intimate suffering, the horror that built the throne, is quietly forgotten. The real lesson is not just about power, it is about us. It is about how fear can be wielded, how cruelty can be rationalized, and how history often celebrates the victor while erasing the victims. And as you step away from the shadows of this man's life, you understand, the horror was never only his. It is also what this story says about the fragile, perilous nature of human ambition. You turn one last time toward the empty courtyards, the broken chains, the silent whispers of those whose lives shaped history, and you realize the truth. History remembers the conqueror, but the soul of the conquered tells the story we should never forget.